Most of us think the hardest part of building wealth is right at the beginning. The grind, the scrimping and saving, that slow, painful climb. But what if I told you the most dangerous moment isn't when you're struggling, but when you finally start to succeed? Yeah, that's when the real test begins.
Okay, let's really get into this because it's such a critical question. The moment progress becomes visible, the moment money starts to feel a little bit easier, that's when our own brains can start working against us. It can lead to some huge mistakes that can literally undo years of hard work. Today, we're going to break down exactly how that happens. So, let's start with a number that should just stop you in your tracks for a second. 70%. What in the world could this possibly be?
That's right, 70%. We're talking about the ultimate windfall, a life-changing amount of money, and yet the vast majority lose it all. And listen, this isn't just a case of bad luck. It's a pattern. It's the most extreme example of the success trap, and it proves that getting the money is one thing, but keeping it, that's a completely different ballgame. So why does this happen? Well, the problem isn't the money itself, it's our own psychology. Our brains, which are basically wired for survival and scarcity, can kind of go haywire when they're suddenly faced with abundance and success. And this leads us to the core concept behind all these financial flameouts. And this is the key right here, cognitive biases. They're basically mental shortcuts that help us make sense of the world. But under the stress and, let's be honest, the euphoria of success, they can become traps. They cause us to misjudge risk, misread our own abilities, and ultimately make some really, really terrible decisions. So let's look at the first major mistake this leads to. The first, and maybe the most seductive trap of them all, is overconfidence. That early success feels incredible, right? It feels like you're a genius, that you're super talented, or that your timing was just perfect. But when you start confusing momentum with your own personal genius, you stop respecting risk. You completely forget that conditions can and absolutely will change. And this is the overconfidence bias in action. It makes you feel invincible. You start to believe your success was only because of your skill, not because you had a strong system, or maybe just a really favorable market. And that belief, it encourages you to take bigger, wilder risks because, hey, you think you can't lose. You start to completely ignore the potential downside. And this chart just brilliantly illustrates the real-world cost. I mean, look at these numbers for NFL players. We're talking about elite earners at the absolute top of their game. After just 12 years of retirement, their bankruptcy rate is astronomically higher than for the rest of us. It's not because they didn't earn enough money, obviously. It's because that success created a false sense of safety, which led them to risky ventures where the downside was totally ignored. Forgetting that conditions can reverse makes the bad times absolutely devastating.
So the crucial point here is pretty simple. Confidence is what builds wealth. It's essential. You gotta have it. But overconfidence, that belief that you're infallible and that the good times will just roll on forever, that's what can bring the whole thing crashing down. Okay, let's move on to the second mistake, which often flows directly from that overconfidence. And that is abandoning the very system that made you successful in the first place. See, as the money improves, a couple of dangerous things start to happen. Your expenses quietly creep up, and those boring, disciplined habits that built your foundation, well, they start to feel unnecessary. This story from a Reddit user is just heartbreaking, but it is a perfect example. $5 million, gone. Why? Well, she bought timeshares, flipped brand new cars, spent like crazy. The mistake wasn't enjoying her success. It was locking her future freedom into these massive fixed costs without any kind of system. The windfall just fueled impulse, not discipline. And this is exactly how that spiral happens. Success arrives, so the boring routines feel like overkill. You abandon the system. The mistake isn't upgrading your life, it's upgrading it way too fast and ditching the automations and the routines that protect you. The irony is just staggering. The boring system that got you there is the first thing to go. And that is how all your progress gets undone. All right, the final mistake we'll cover is one of the most insidious because it feels like ambition. After you hit your goals, you don't just magically stop comparing yourself to others. Nope. The comparison just moves to a higher and honestly more dangerous level. And it tempts you to start chasing even bigger and bigger wins. Just look at how the goalposts shift here. Before, your goal was stability, building a foundation. But after a little success, you're suddenly looking at people with much bigger earnings, riskier success stories. Your whole definition of enough gets completely reset.
And this leads to things like concentrated bets and chasing massive upside, because wealth isn't just about security anymore. Now it's a competition. This desire to keep up triggers a bunch of these cognitive biases, but one of the most powerful is what's known as herding bias. You see what this new wealthier crowd is doing, the speculative investments, the leverage, and you feel this intense pressure to follow along, even if it means abandoning your own strategy that was working perfectly fine for one you don't even understand. So, if winning is a trap, how do you avoid it? Well, the goal itself has to shift. It's no longer about accelerating at all costs. It's about protecting what you've built. It's about recognizing that success is not the finish line. This right here is the most important reframing you can make. Success isn't the reward where you finally get to relax. It's the beginning of a new and in many ways more difficult test. Think about it. Most people don't lose wealth by failing early on. They lose it by changing their behavior after they start winning. The real challenge is just staying consistent. So how do you pass that test? Well, you respect that luck and markets run in cycles. You maintain your boring automated systems. You upgrade your lifestyle way more slowly than your income grows. And maybe most importantly, you embrace staying boring. The people who actually maintain wealth aren't the boldest. They're the ones who don't change the game plan just because they're ahead on the scoreboard. And that really is the final takeaway. When things are finally working, when that snowball is rolling downhill and getting bigger on its own, your primary job is no longer to push it harder. It's simply to get out of the way and not mess it up. Protecting your success is the hardest and without a doubt the most important part of winning.